Am I the only one that hears water dripping or running? I am.
Oh, I hear it. I hear it too.
Do you?
It might be mine.
Go ahead, Irene.
All right, so today is February 9th, 2021. This is the Dearborn Public School, the Finance Committee. We're meeting via Zoom in Dearborn, Michigan, calling this to order. And I'm going to send it over to Dr. Maleko.
Okay, and I'm gonna, we've had these meetings both in person when we're allowed to and virtually, and right now, obviously, we're virtually. And so yesterday we mentioned at the board meeting, I want to mention just kudos to the board and Mr. Wall for the meritorious budget award that we received for budget transparency and for the work done to support our students. And that's an international recognition 3 years in a row. Again, with a clean audit, goes to the credit to the board, to administration, to Mr. Wall and his leadership, and our instructional team that are obviously, we're here for instruction. So that budget balancing and that fiscal responsibility is important to our instructional program. So thank you, Trustee Watts, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wall, Executive Director of Business and Operations.
Well, good afternoon, Chairperson Watts and board members. We have a Finance Committee agenda. I'm going to share my screen so you can follow along on the agenda, but again, it was also sent in an email, so you can follow it on your own also. All right, just give me a thumbs up. You can see the agenda. All right. So this meeting usually goes about 60 minutes. Sometimes we're shorter, sometimes we're longer, and it's interactive. So I'll kind of, field questions as we go along because we have the time now to kind of dig deeper into the finances. And the idea of the Finance Committee is just for this committee members have a deeper understanding about the financial issues of the district. So when the board discusses it at an open quorum of a full board meeting, you're more knowledgeable and can help assist the conversation as we go forward. So last night we did present, a shortened version of the presentation of what the financial condition of the district is. And I do have it linked here. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but if you wanted to kind of had any more questions on that, we can always refer back to it. But just so you know, it's there as part of the agenda. And usually when I do Finance Committee meetings, I link everything to the agenda. That way you don't have to go searching for it. You can always go back here and see where it's at and always link it. So I'm not going to go too far in that, but one of the things we talked about greatly that changed from last year to this year, back in May, we were actually told that we were going to get some CARES funds. And CARES funds is an acronym for the federal money that came from the federal down to the state, and the state issued it to us in pieces. We knew at that time the budget was adopted, we were going to get roughly about $8 million. However, they didn't really tell us how to spend it or how we're going to access it. So we knew about it. So we budgeted it in the funded projects where we put all our grants at. And the reason we have funded projects because we don't want to mess up the general fund. There's enough going on in the general fund to confuse it from grants that may come and go every year. And so people are saying, well, what changed? And you'll be looking at the general fund and numbers would go up and down. And we didn't want to do that. So we always have it in a separate fund and funded projects. So that's where you'll see Title I, Title II, Title VI with the special ed. So we always keep it separate. So our general fund is more of just our operating aspect. So I'm going to click on the General Enhancement Fund Summary. So come after they told us back in May, June, we're going to get this. We then had to wait to figure out how to spend it. So we really didn't have a plan at the time of the budget of how to spend it. Now, a lot of these files are in Excel. And when you deal with Excel, it's good, but for when we do presentations, we usually just open it in Google Sheets. So it's much easier for us to access. So, I skipped, hold on. Wrong one. The other one we'll talk in just a minute. So when we got this money last year, we knew we were going to get $8 million, but again, the state has to go through their budgetary process to release it. So by the time I'd say October came around, we knew we were going to get these funds, and each one has its own category. You can see starting from the left in the blue, that's what they call ESSER. That's money directly from the federal government. that we could use for really anything dealing with the pandemic. So it's the least restrictive of the funds we received. Then we received ESSER Education Equity, the green column, and that had to do with mental health. So that one was kind of restricted on mental health. Then we got the GEAR funds. Those are actually funds that the state had that was discretionary, and they gave a portion to schools. And of course, that came along with very restricted ideas of how to use it too. Then we got 11P and 103.2, the pink funds. Those are further restricted. And so as you can see, it gets very complicated when you're trying to budget this, because we've already started our school year, and then we got $19.7 million, and we had to figure out how to spend it. And so if you remember last night, if it's restricted funds, I want to spend that money first, because if we don't spend the federal money, we don't get it. We can't bank it. We can't save it for years down the line. We have to spend it within a year. So it's always to our benefit to spend this money first, and then go back to the general fund and kind of fill back in of what we want to do with our operational budget. So you can see over the columns that we have to figure out how to spend it. So we spend a lot of time in administration. You can see now that we spend it on textbooks. If you remember back in May or June, we had new English textbooks for K-5, and we had some science or math textbooks for the high school. Now, fortunately, those had, for example, online component. And therefore, since it had an online component, we were able to charge it to the federal grants. And that's kind of how we went through all these examples of how to spend this specific money. So we have to track it. And if you're dealing with federal money, you know darn well when the auditors come through, they're going to check it to make sure we're in compliance of how to spend it, how we get the money, and how do we account for it for dollar. You know, with federal money, if you're off $1, doesn't matter if it's $1 or $1 million, it's a finding. So we have to be very careful and very specific in how we spend that money. So we spend a lot of time going through this, and you can see there's a lot of things that we're adding to it. And you can spend more time on your own going through it. But you can see there's FTEs. You know, when I was talking yesterday that last year we were going to adopt our budget, we were going to lay off 16 positions. However, the state wanted us to employ people to keep people employed, and so we wouldn't enter into recession. So since we were going to lay off those teachers, one of the criteria for the ESSER that we could still retain those teachers and pay them through the federal money. So those kind of things that we're looking for. Like on the mental health down here, you'll see that there's technology, you know, a psychologist, social workers. So we were able to either hire additional social workers or move some of our existing ones over there, knowing that that was what we could spend that education equity on. And we kind of went through that whole process. There's big numbers down here that you'll see for PPE, you know, almost $250,000 that we're spending on PPE materials to make sure that we're ready for our staff and students when they come. And so we have spent some of that because our staff has been in the buildings with learning groups earlier in the year. Now, majority of that money will be spent as the kids are starting to come back for, you know, hand washing and all sorts of things, you know, thermometers, all those things are in the part of the PPE. So I just want to kind of give you a little background of how we do the federal money when we get one-time money. So this money will give us a one-time savings in our general fund as we're able to take some of this money and move it into the federal grants.
Quick question, Tom.
Yes, go right ahead.
The ESSER grant,
Yes.
mental health, I thought I saw 1.5 million. I don't know if that's correct. Is that the total grant?
The total grant right here is 8.4 million on top. That's what the total
Okay,
grant
I'm
is
looking for one column over. Okay, obviously we can always dip into the general fund. What other grants? Because last night's meeting, I kept on hearing, you know, mental health, for obvious reasons too. What other grants are available other than the ESSER? You know, let's put the general fund on the side. Is there any other grants that we can tap into?
Well, the equity grant was specifically for mental health. So
I mean, I think that's the one I was referring to.
1.5 million.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, 1.5. So, okay.
Yeah, so that was specifically for mental health. Now, ESSER also, because it's least restrictive and still dealing with the pandemic, so we're able to use some of that funds too. So you can see in there that we'll have some money in their column too. For example, speech pathologist is in ESSER, social workers are in ESSER.
I see. Okay.
So we were able to kind of go back, and that's why the restricted one is on the right, and it's less restrictive when you go left. So that's
Okay.
why we were trying to make sure spend to the right, to the left, and kind of see how we can spend this money.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank
So
you.
that's why. So now, if you see on the agenda too, there's going to be an ESSER 2 allocation. So
I
this
have
is
a
going to be
question too,
additional.
Tom.
Yes.
I know that when we purchase things or increase staffing levels and things like that, it may come from a grant, but that's one-time money. If we increase staff, that's continual money that's expended.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that? Have we overstepped what we can afford in the future, or how are we going to balance that situation?
So what I was going to show you down here in the bottom, in this bright red box, roughly out of that 19.7 million, there's potential of 13 million that could carry over to next year.
Okay.
And so we were planning ahead to make sure that that 13 million was something that we could afford going forward. And that's why in the general fund, if you remember last night, that part of this one-time savings, we're going to spend it on buying some vehicles, some equipment, do additional training. And we know that normally we usually have, anywhere from 40 to 50 retirements every year. So what the idea is, if those retirements positions would kind of flow into that, we wouldn't necessarily hire new people. So we have a plan in place that we know that we're not going to really struggle, because if we go back to our staffing model, we know that we would have laid off 16 people to begin with. So that 16 will come off of the 50 retirements. So now we're down to all 50.
Does it get a little problematic if we're saying hiring a lot of like mental health specialists and that type of things, and the ones that retire end up being math teachers and science teachers? And
Yep. So the juggling of how they're highly qualified to the positions that they teach, or certifications like in social worker, they have to have a master's degree in a certain field. It does get a little problematic, so it gets a little complicated, but HR is very good at working through that. And as I just mentioned earlier, that we're going to get ESSER 2 funds.
okay.
And so we understand that ESSER 2 funds are going to be available for 2 years.
Okay.
So what we'll do is, once the state issues that or awards it to the district, we have to wait for MDE to validate how we're going to spend it and what we can spend it on. And that usually takes a couple of months. So hopefully they'll start this process quick, so we're not dealing halfway through the school year and trying to backtrack. But we know that mental health will still be a piece of that, because they've already given us some clue of what it's going to be spent for. And if mental health, some of this cost can just go into CARES 2 or ESSER 2 funds to carry forward for the next 2 years. So we'll really have a 3-year span of federal money to kind of help us through this process.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So I'm not overly concerned about that 13.
Tom, I have a
know
question.
we have the general fund surplus and the ESSER 2 funds coming that will kind of make sure we can transition smoothly and not hire
Okay.
or lay people off. Yes. Irene?
Am I reading this correctly, that the CARES Act, does it run out, or do we have to have the money spent by September 30th of this year?
Of 21, correct.
Okay.
So what we did is, it was eligible to go back to April 13th when the schools closed. And so we're able to take this full fiscal year, even though we didn't get the money till September, October, we can go back to the beginning of this school year, make sure we spend all that money and a little bit for next year if we need to. And then hopefully ESSER 2 will be in place, and our own budget will adopt it from going forward if need be.
And Tom,
And then
I heard
sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Rice that there may be, I think I mentioned to you, and I don't know if it was finalized, that they may allow a 2-year span for some of the grants coming out of MDE. That's what he told me in some of our meetings. I don't know if that's been finalized yet, but.
Yeah, it was interesting because these two, the pink ones, they gave the money to us in September and said we had to spend it by December. You're talking 3 months. All right, I got $7.5 million I got to spend in 3 months, and I'm just now hearing about it. Now, as part of their December at the federal level, they said, all right, no, we're going to continue to September 30th now also. So that was good, because then we didn't have to struggle. But of course, we already had all the planning in place, so we will spend it by December. Well, that's okay, but they gave us some districts were struggling with that whole aspect, so we were okay though. Yes.
And then the other question is, so from this CARES fund, have we already spent and allocated all the 19.7 million?
You can see there's a little difference here, that we budgeted 8.6 million, and we have actually only allowed 8.4 million, so we have a little buffer there. Because even though you have the greatest plan to spend all this money, things happen. You know, a staff member might say, well, I'm going to retire early and leave middle of the year, or they resign and take another job somewhere else, and that yet we had money budgeted them for the whole year. So those kind of things happen. So it's always a juggling mode that eventually we'll have to go back to the state and amend the grant for some different funding. They mentioned that they might carry over some funds, but we have not gotten any verification yet that they would go past the September 30th timeframe.
Okay.
But know for sure that we're going to spend all of it as much as we can.
I have faith in you, Tom.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on then. I was going to go back to the general. So just kind of give you an idea on the general fund enhancement fund. That's the largest part. So let me go to this for a second. Because I always like going to this screen. This, you know, again, this is our picture of our funds. So when we really, the capital project, the debt funds, all kind of take care of themselves, you know, as we go through the process. The special revenues where all the grants are on here. You see funded projects, and that's where all the CARES are. The CARES are just one piece of all our grants. Things like Title I, Title II, our annual appropriations that we do every year that, you know, other departments put together. Rose does a great job on Title III, which deals with all the English as a second language, ELL students, all that stuff. The curriculum side does Title II for all the training and things. And also Rose does Title I, which gets allocated majority out to all the buildings, and each one of the building does all their stuff. But it all kind of comes together. So I don't really have a strong pull in that because it's all grant-based and restricted on certain how they spend the money, but eventually rolls up into the special revenue fund. So when we talk about the budget for operational purposes, we're really dealing with this one box, which is the general fund, athletic fund, and enhancement funds. Those are the ones that we normally deal with. And even the athletic fund, unless the board changes sports and allow a different sport to come on or something to that effect, that's pretty standard too, because our costs are associated with each sport that's run. So really get down to the general fund and enhancement fund, where we really have a lot of capability to really change our program however we want to do it. So that's where the majority of the work is done. So what I'm doing now is we're going to talk about the general enhancement fund. And there's a spreadsheet that I do, which the sharing thing won't let me do half the time.
Tom, at this point, all of our buildings are Title I buildings, aren't they?
No.
No.
There's still a few that are not. Sometimes when the allocation is large enough, it'll get down, because when you get Title I funds, you get an allocation and you go by the highest need to the buildings, and you keep working your way down until you run out of money. And usually the lower buildings that have lower free and reduced counts might not get money every given year, or if they do, get very little. And so you'll hear about some of the schools that, well, I don't have the money to replace our Promethean boards on the board, you know, on the walls, because everybody else is spending Title I funds. They don't have that amount to be able to replace it. So things like that do happen for some of our buildings.
Okay.
So this is kind of what I use as a master control sheet when we talk about the general fund. So as you can see here on the top, we have our revenue, which is our local money we get for taxes, state money that comes directly from the state. That's where our foundation allowance is. And just kind of a quick update, because I know this is also taped, that we get $1 per pupil for every student. And so that's where that money comes through. And we also have what we call categoricals, where we get reimbursed for specific costs, like the state offsets some of our retirement costs, things like that. Federal money, we don't have a lot in the general fund because most of it is in the grant funds, you know, all the funded projects. So mostly we see Medicare reimbursements we get from the state. And interdistrict is where we get money from ISD or other school districts. And transfers is when money comes from those other pots to the general fund for reimbursements, i.e., like funded projects, we're allowed to charge indirect costs because we don't charge our payroll to them, you know, process for HR and accounting, all that isn't charged directly to grants. It's what we use as an indirect cost rate that we charge grants, and that money comes back to the general fund through transfers. Then also see on the expenditure side, we have the different categories of salary, benefits, FICA, and retirement. and they're broken down by that because that's how we have to follow the state on their chart of accounts to make sure we're accounting for all the money in a certain categories. But you can see the original budget here is what I wanted to point out. 2.208 million is what our revenue was because we were expecting a $650 charge back because of where they were on their economy estimations. And we approved at 212 million. Now we knew we were going to have a deficit that year of roughly 4.6 million. But again, we were going to take the balance out of our fund balance to make sure that we can keep it whole, and over time, with hopefully the economy returning back to normalcy, that we would get additional revenue and kind of level back out again. But we were planning on cutting about 54 positions from the district back then. Now, obviously, as time progressed and the state had their third revenue consensus meeting in August, after the income taxes were submitted by July 15th, they found out the economy was much better. They didn't prorate us to 650, and therefore we didn't have that large payroll deduction. So our first amendment is at 221 million, roughly about $13 million higher because of that proration that did not occur. And we started adding back some of the positions that we knew we needed, that now our expenses are up to 217 million. And we also pushed a lot of that money to the grants, as I showed it before, in the CARES funds. So now we're looking at a surplus of roughly 4.1 million in the general fund. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. And we also have the enhancement fund down here. And
I have a question, Tom.
Yes.
You said we have a surplus of 4.1 million in the general fund. Was that
right? Now go ahead.
I thought it was more than that. Or is this just from the CARES money, or what? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
It's more money because we knew it was one-time money, and I'd rather use it in the year we have the surplus versus adding it to the fund balance and then subtracting it the next year, because then your fund balance goes up and down, and creditors don't like that. And I know we're working on a bond issue and all that and refunding. They don't like seeing a jagged up and down. They want to see a nice gradual change.
Okay.
And so what we decided is we're going to transfer additional money. If you saw in the budget presentation, we're going to transfer $8 million to our building and site to start some of our projects.
Okay. Yeah, that's
we're
right.
At least a year and a half away from any kind of bond issue campaign. So we can start doing some of the things that we can do on our own. You saw the video camera project that we had on the board. You'll see some future ones coming forward for some vehicle replacements, some equipment like mowers and stuff that we can use one time. And we've started to add some staff back, where we looked at the media specialists. We're early hiring K-12 teachers that we can then, because we know we're going to have the retirements that kind of help. So if we have a particular issue at a school where we have to close down due to the pandemic, because of close contacts, that we have the subs in place ready to go that are our employees that are familiar with our systems and can step in and keep the program running positively.
Now, does doing that transfer affect us in any way? Because I know that we cannot fall below 5% without getting dinged. I don't know what other term to use.
Cited, yes.
Cited.
No, we're above that because we're already at the 12% mark. So this will get us a little higher. And the idea is that when next year, depending when ESSER funds come back and that staff money runs out for all that COVID money, that we'll just lower our transfer down to the building and site project so we can then afford the staffing that comes back into the general fund.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Again, with the concept that use the restricted money first and have options in our general fund to do some other things as we wait for that money to flow back into the general fund.
Okay.
All right, I'm going fast, but just let me know. But you'll see all sorts of tabs down here where we have close to probably 18,000 individual line items. And I'm not going to bore you go through that, but they all kind of accumulate forward into this master control sheet that how we kind of then give our summary numbers for how things all come together and kind of give you the shortened version to see how our revenues are and our expenditures. Okay. So on our FTEs, so I just wanted to touch base on this briefly. On our FTEs, you can see in this column on the all by classification. So ADSA is our administrative group, NCSX are our non-instructional non-supervisors. You have the DFT, you have DFSC, so all our union groups. You can see that we were at 2280 for our FTEs last year, and this year we're at 2256. But you can see some went up, some went down. So you can see our teachers, even though we didn't lay off anybody, we still increased it. That's the fourth line down right here. We went from 655, I'm sorry, third one down, 1417 to 1426. Even though we didn't lay off those 16 teachers, we still added 9 additional teachers. So 9.5. And so we have been putting staff back into the buildings to help with virtual learning, with class sizes. So we've actually added staff back to the budget in the teacher area. In addition, if you look over here, so here's the 16 we didn't lay off, the 9.5 we hired in addition to where we were last year, and our student enrollment went from 20,785, what we budgeted for, down to our 20,419. Looking at average class sizes that were really overstaffed by 15 students. So roughly about 40 staff more than we were last year for teachers. And so that's why I'm saying the staff, we've been investing into the classroom because of this pandemic to help with class sizes and support positions to help students. So I just want to give you that feeling that we are investing money back into the schools, and we're actually going to invest more. This was before the 12 additional FTEs we're looking at now for early hire, addition to social workers, addition to the media specialists that we're going to be adding back, addition to the 3 counselors we're adding back. So just so you're aware that number will grow, just so you know that people are saying, well, what are you doing for your surplus? We are investing it back into the programs. Okay? So just kind of give you a quick kind of snapshot that, you know, we are a people business, and we want to make sure that our people are in front of kids as much as possible. Okay? And the last one, we got some information from them on CARES 2. And these are all the districts. I wasn't able to look at it, but you want to focus on column G, that's the total, because there's CARES funds and ESSER funds. CARES funds, they're calling Gear 2, because we had Gear 1 in that previous spreadsheet. But it's based on your enrollment, your ELL population, your special ed population, and things like that for the allocation. And we have to go down to line 187 for Dearborn. Wow, too far. So Dearborn is right here. So we are scheduled to get 44 million for CARES 2 funds. Now that's a lot of money. So hopefully they'll tell us what we can use it for quicker. And we don't know how fast the legislators are going to release this money in some sort of format. But one of the things they did say this round for your ESSER 2 funds, that you'll be able to use some of this money for infrastructure. So one of the things, obviously, that they wanted to focus on, especially, is air handling and circulation in the buildings. Now, you're well aware we don't have a lot of air conditioning in our schools.
Right.
Last 2 summers ago, we made a concerted effort to make sure every building had at least a common area for kids that they could rotate through that had air conditioning. Now, with air conditioning comes air handling and filtering and all that. So hopefully, as we get through this ESSER 2 and get more information, we might start, you know, a little campaign here of trying to get, you know, our buildings more air conditioned and air handling in the schools. So just you're kind of aware of that. That's one of the reasons why I'm thinking that we can spend this amount of money in the 2-year time frame that they wanted to get it done in. And obviously, staffing will be another big piece of that. So that's coming down the road. We don't have enough information yet, but kind of give the finance committee an idea where there's a large pot of money coming our way to deal with the mental health and building aspects and all dealing with this.
Do you have any idea, Tom, if the infrastructure piece that we might be able to spend would be on more than just air conditioning and airflow and that kind of thing, or you have no idea at this point?
Not yet. They only gave us a little snippet, you know, of what, you know, that potentially could be used for, but eventually MD is going to have to fill that out to make sure, and then we have to look at it and see how it applies.
Okay.
From what I've heard from federal as well is that it's probably the HVAC and those kind of things that they're focusing on because of the return to school.
Right.
But again, not for sure. Those are just some of the things I've heard.
I got a question, most likely is for Dr. Maleko. What else can we do to support our social workers? I know you created positions, whatever. What other means what is it that we can do to help support them? Because we definitely don't want them stressed out. I know a couple of them called since last night and they're feeling some anxieties, but that's normal after listening. But
if I can just jump in for a second, I think when we're working with Mike Asaley on this, the caseloads, if you can reduce the caseloads, that gives them more time to deal individually with kids and family. And doesn't really make them feel that they're overwhelmed. So I know that's one of the reasons we're looking at it, hiring additional social workers to reduce the caseloads and spread them out better, because some buildings don't have a lot of time. And that way,
that just gives better service.
Maybe assigned to just one building versus, all right, going to this building, then rushing to another building. So I know that's one of the things that Mike Asaley is looking at. Sorry, Glenn.
And we have that Ulions too that they can reach out to, which is a service for the district. So if there's individuals that have, because obviously they're probably hearing a lot of the tough situations and stories, right? That is human. That we're all human, but they're the ones that are often hearing some of the very difficult things that students or families are going through. So sometimes they may need someone to reach out to. So we put out that Ulions a couple of times, which I'm glad it was like the timing of bringing that in April was very good. So they have that option. I would say too, like our nurses, for example, Trustee Barry, our nurses have been under a lot of pressure, right?
Sure.
But what they've done, and maybe this is something, and I'll talk to Mike Asaley, but this would be kind of under Dr. Bazzi Gates, who heads up the social workers. The fact that they stick together with each other and they meet regularly and they kind of share with each other. And I know they do, but that would be another way. Like, I'll tell you, our nurses, they meet on a routine basis, and I'm sure our social workers do, but they've kind of established that culture within, right, that they support. And I've seen that of our social workers. Like, I can speak to some of the ones that I know just go, go, go. And I think what we can also do is, like Dr. Swidan, who's an experienced social worker who I've known for many years. I'm just using her as an example, but she's one, as you've seen with the stupid, she just, go, go, go. And she reaches out to me with all these different ideas. And I think one of the things that she came to me, and this is where our district works out of the box, is, I put it in board briefs going back to like November, and I've announced it, is so, a lot of times, the social workers are the ones knocking on the doors and doing the extra call. If you recall, we realigned all of our non-instructional staff. And I even mentioned it at one of the meetings that we had people going door to door, helping out that load so that it doesn't just fall. It's like a team effort. And so I think that's a way that we've thought out of the box to try to support them. And again, Dr. Swidan kind of led that, but she worked with Mike Asaley. And I think, I just think it's going to be tough, Trustee Barry, and I think we got to kind of stick together. We can hire more, that helps, but we also need to tap into the leadership within the group to provide support and guidance as well, especially for our new social workers. But I would say that for any of our positions, we just came out of a general administrators meeting, and we called that today just because of the board decision last night. We didn't plan it, but we were ready, and we call the meeting when we need to. And Trustee Barry, you've seen when we've called crisis meetings, and I have one tomorrow, and those kind of things. And what I've told my cabinet is, especially the newer principals that are maybe not as seasoned, that we do two things: we extra support from central office. Secondly, the colleagues within the ranks, those that have the senior and the experience. I can speak as a principal building administrator for 9 years. We have others in the district like that. So that's how we kind of come together to support each other. So I'll check with Mike Asaley and mention it. But I think those are some of the things off the top of my head that we can do.
Okay, let me give you an example too. Let's say, I'm dealing with potential suicidal student. I'm dealing with this. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed myself. I know I need some time off, but you know what? I can't afford to take time off because it's going to affect my evaluation. What can we do in that department to say, reach out to us? Because obviously we don't want to lose them. We don't want them to feel like they're overwhelmed and like if they just need like a few days off or what have you. I know they have a contract, but what can we do to kind of reach out to them to say, hey, if you need us, we're here?
Well, I think we're being flexible on the attendance this year. So that they shouldn't even, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that because we took out the attendance incentive and other things. You know, I
Do
guess.
they know that? Do they know that?
You
know, we can do a lot of things, but unless it gets down to,
the board employees hasn't changed, but like I said, we're going to be hiring social workers. So I'm open to ideas, to be honest. If there's something you guys think, I can go back to Mike and see what we can do. But I think that a lot of our staff, I mean, yeah, if a social worker needs to take a couple of days off, they have that right. And then we do have, that's why I think we have very, we give out for our profession, generous sick bank / days that you can use. And so no one would question that if they needed to use a day or two because they're, they need to take some time. I mean, I think we all need to from time to time,
Exactly. But I mean, we need somehow, somewhere we got to communicate with them. I know it's a great group. They're not going to take advantage of anything. But somehow, you mentioned Dr. Gates a couple of times. Is she kind of their leader when it comes to social workers?
Yeah, she's the administrator.
Okay.
So she reports to Micah Saley, but there's 4 coordinators, and she has responsibility over the social workers, and she is a social worker. That's where she.
Sure.
So she is actually the head, so I can talk to Micah Saley and talk to her, and we can come up with some ideas.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right.
I have a quick question or 2 questions. Within the ESSER or maybe in the CARES, I know that you were saying that we were bringing on additional staff and support in terms of social workers and counselors, and then I think also media. Is there any need to increase the arts? Because I know that we have sports that are coming back, but is there a need from the community to increase the art options in our schools at all? Or is that pretty much not a need?
There's always a need. And I would say to you, there's a need to even have more social workers than we're hiring now. And there's a need for even more art because, but it's kind of a balance of where are you going to balance your budget, I guess. And so one of the things we have done with the arts, and we champion the arts in Dearborn, is we started years ago. There was a cut to the middle school program. This was when I was a middle school principal, and the way the electives were developed was based on student interest in signing up. Before the pandemic, we had already started the process of looking at how we can try to, and I provided more staffing to the arts to balance it. And the reason I say that is because it's difficult for a principal to run a class of 10 students when you only have 10 signing up. But what we've done is tried to balance it and understand that. But in a lot of cases, you can't because last year, remember, we were dealing with the budget. So I would say there's always a need. It's not that there's not a need. It's where do you want to balance the budget relative to what you need. We've had the elective teachers in the secondary, we call them elective, or at the elementary, the special area, we call them. Brainstorm how to do things and how to do it in the pandemic. And so it's been difficult for them because it's not the core teacher. So there's always a need for it. There's never not a need. And I think in the music program, they always advocate. One of the things I think, though, we need to do is just between the elementary to middle to high school. And I was having meetings on this, and I met with gentlemen from the Arab American Symphony Orchestra. And we were, before the pandemic, this was to work on how to gain more interest in those areas from the students. So yeah, there's always a need.
Yeah. I mean, just in terms of like we were talking about the mental health, some students gravitate towards sports, some gravitate toward the arts, and just making sure that we can offer those for them to kind of, again, help support them. Okay.
Well, a great example, and I know we've talked a lot, is Trustee Barry. I know you're an advocate, and I've sat with you at the performances over, like, for example, at Stout. And I know Trustee McDonald, you've been there. And some of those kids, it's just like, for me, my son is into hockey and that's his thing, right? And that connects him to school. For some, it's the theater and those kind of things. So absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where my daughter is. She's between both. So, she's both athletic and she loves the art. So, okay.
And many of those budget requests come up through the process. I think we're in our 5th year for lab piano replacement. So the board has been seeing one come every year, once a year, to do the next portion of a school. And I think we're 2 years out of a 5th year out of a 6-year program. So those things come up through the process, and they get presented along with everything else. And, it's like Glenn says, it's a balancing game because you can't do everything. So you have to prioritize and you rotate it through and things like that. So, yes. So on the budget presentation, you can see we're in good shape. There's some sunlight at the horizon of what next year will look like. The governor's proposal is usually out by now, but it's not. I'm sure it's being kind of politicked around a little bit. So we'll see that comes out, and that really starts the discussion at the state level of what next year will look like. And so that's usually, she already did her state of address, so she mentioned a little bit of it, but we haven't actually seen the actual plan. After that happens, and then in March and early April, the Senate and the House for Michigan start talking about their plans. And then usually after that happens, it's usually on hold until May when we have our second revenue consensus of the year. First one is in January, early January, but that was very positive. There's a lot of money right now available for schools in the school aid fund. And then May will come up and give an update. And that's when you actually then have a kind of a meeting of the minds between the three, and they come out with the school aid plan. Last year was well delayed because of the pandemic and the unknown economy. So hopefully we'll get to more of a normalcy this year as the economy still seems to be plugging along pretty well. So we don't envision any cuts this year. So if anything, we'll be continuing to add staff back as we go along.
Tom, I have a question. With the money that we're anticipating in the ESSER 2, is that wholly separate from the possibility of federal funds that we would get if this Restoration Act comes through? Or
we're referring to that as CARES 3 funds.
Okay.
But there would probably be an ESSER 3 component underneath that. So yeah.
Okay. So, but that does filter from the Fed to the state, then to the district. Correct? Okay.
Yeah, so that's a third round that if it does happen, will be above and beyond what we've talked about today.
Okay. And Irene, just to let you know, one of the ongoing issues that we have with school budgets is that our budget is due well before the budget of the state is due. So we always have to kind of guess where we're going to be before we even know how much money we're going to get. So that's just an issue that's ongoing, and it's always problematic.
Yeah, isn't it that their budget has to be due in June and then they allocate the funds in September? Do I have that correct?
Well, the state's budget year starts October 1st through September 30th, where ours is July 1st through June 30th. And so we're always struggling to kind of get a good idea of what they're going to do. And it's always based on estimates. We don't have fixed numbers. So there's always going to be a change. And the axiom we always hear that wait till tomorrow and then your budget's out of date.
Yeah.
Because things change that quickly sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
All right. If no other questions on the budget, we're going to move on the agenda then. Just a quick update.
Tom, 1 second. I wanted to ask, I didn't want to interrupt you. You mentioned something yesterday when it came to the food service cost.
Yes.
So that food, can you elaborate a little bit on the food service fund, where we're at? And
yep.
It sounded a little concerning, but I didn't want to, dig into it yesterday. I knew we were going to meet tonight.
So here is from the budget presentation. You can see the food service fund, which is kind of in the middle here.
Yeah.
The way the federal government changed the school lunch program is they want to make sure they can feed as many kids as possible. So they lowered the restrictions on how much sodium, how much grain. So we could actually offer different menu items that weren't as restricted, which started way back in the Obama administration of the restrictions. And so we were able to offer more items at lunchtime. In addition, they took away the restriction, with federal money, because the National School Lunch Program is how we get funded majority of our money, that we have to account for every dollar all the way through. So we had to keep a list of what kids ate that day, because unfortunately, kids are kids. Sometimes they'll give their card to somebody else and they'll come through the line again. And our system would catch something like that and say, nope, you've already had a lunch today. You can't have a second lunch. And so they took that whole restriction away for what we call summer feeding rules, where you just show up, you say, I have 5 kids, you get 5 lunches. And so it didn't matter if you're from Dearborn, you know, if a parent came through twice, there's no checks and balances on that because the federal government just waived all that and say, just feed people. And so what we're seeing is we're serving more lunches than we ever have in a normal school year, that we just topped over 100,000 meals a week. And we don't know if it's from parents or kids from Allen Park, Ecorse, you know, Traverse City. If they were coming through, it doesn't matter. As long as they
Traverse City
during our time frame and ask, I have 4 kids, they got 4 lunches.
Sure.
So our revenues are way up. And also, you know, if you're, you know, a lot of people aren't able to work during the pandemic because they have kids at home, whatever. So our staffing costs are down. So what we're realizing is we're looking at a $2 million surplus for the school service fund for this year. Now, obviously, if we get back to this hybrid schedule, our costs are going to go up because now we got to go to individual buildings and feed them that way. And so that will actually probably go down a little bit. But with that surplus, again, that I just want to make sure everyone aware that, you know, our food service is going to have that surplus again. And you're only allowed to carry a fund balance up to 15% of your program. So in previous years, we've gotten a letter from MDE saying you're over that threshold, submit a plan of how we're going to bring it back into line. And we replaced, I say, probably about 12 or 13 service lines so far that kind of, for capital improvements to kind of bring our fund balance back down. We're actually looking at freezers. So in the March agenda, you'll probably see an agenda item for buying outside freezers that we can attach to the building with an outside door to kind of just more, because they're dealing with a lot of capacity needs in the buildings, as you're well aware of. We're very tight. So those are the things you're going to start seeing coming through on the budget.
Is that 15% threshold on other funds as well, or is it's just on the food service?
Yep. The debt fund, you can't have more fund balance than 1 year's worth of levy. So there's different rules.
Okay.
But yeah, not the food service one is strict because that's a federal guideline we have to follow.
Okay.
So the 15% for the food service fund, what is that? What is that amount?
So that's looking at, if you look at this column, the 4.2 million, and you look at our revenue of 14 million, and you know that's going to give you a percentage, and that's where we look at to see where it's at the end of the year. And if it's more than 15% of your revenue proceeds, then you know you're going to get a letter saying that you have to have a plan in place to reduce it down.
And
So
you
what
will
I'm
do
hearing-
it on camp. Oh, sorry, Hussein.
So what I'm hearing you
Go ahead.
say is that you know we're going to be getting a letter, so you're kind of jumping the gun planning
Correct.
for it.
Yes. So
Oh,
that's why
okay.
we're going to do some capital improvements, something we can maybe get done quickly to kind of hopefully bring that number back down.
Do you think we're going to have to bring that number down like 500,000, a million? What just guesstimation?
I'm still waiting. They're developing the plan right now because they're
Okay.
looking at maybe 8 or 9 schools for these freezers, and I'm not sure what the cost is yet. So that's something that operations is working on that we kind of brought to their attention about a month ago that they're kind of putting the plan together.
If we don't use that money, if we don't spend that money, what happens to it?
They'll ask for a specific plan to spend it next year,
Okay. So,
which we will
okay.
do. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yep.
Go ahead,
A lot of
Roxanne.
times
Sorry.
Districts, we're a total 100% free and reduced district because we're part of that community eligibility plan. A lot of times what the state likes to see is to just reduce your lunch cost to kind of give the break back to students, you know, but we can't do that. So we have to look at the capital improvement side to reduce our funding.
That's good.
Oh, I get you. Okay. And it's a capital improvement as long as they're related to food service.
Specifically related, yes. For
Okay.
example, we can't do an air handling unit because that isn't necessarily specifically to it. So that's why we do service lines. That's why we're looking at the freezers, those kind of ideas.
What about, we do some food transportation, don't we?
Yeah, so you can actually look at
Could
the
you
vehicle.
do a van or a
That's one of the
vehicle?
things we're also looking at, yes.
Okay. All right.
Good idea, though. All right,
So Tom, I have one question.
yes.
And this was brought up about the quality of the food. That because you were saying that they said just go ahead and there's no more restrictions, just feed as many people as you want. The quality of the food is turning more into less of the grains, like you were saying, and fresh fruit and vegetables, and more of the high fructose, highly processed food. Is there anything that's in the plan to kind of go back to getting some higher nutrient, higher protein foods out there?
So that's one of the things on the agenda. Good question.
All right.
Part of that issue, though, is that we're doing grab and goes, right?
Yes. So we got to be able to give things to people that will last the whole week, because we're doing one delivery for the full week.
Yeah.
So we have to give them food that they can, store and use throughout the week.
Yeah, and I would just say, Trustee Watson, I appreciate, because before the pandemic with the SFE that came in, we had greatly enhanced, and we were getting positive feedback all over the district. We weren't even looking for it about what was happening. But when you are in person with hot meals and they're doing these taste, different ethnic foods and things that they were bringing in, and then you go to the grab and go, that is part of it, but it doesn't mean it's the whole story. It's just that is part of it as people were starting to get used to that. I was getting a tremendous amount of positive feedback from across the board. And I wasn't looking for it. People were telling me how much, but again, that was pre-pandemic. So.
Yeah. And I think that's what it was as well. I mean, just looking, I think one of the parents was saying, instead of getting like Fruit Loops, just change it up and do it like a cereal, because you want something quick and you want something that's easy and storable, but like making a substitute like that, like an easy substitute, so that you're giving them, Cheerios that are low in sodium, no sugar whatsoever, but yet you still kind of meet that need of getting the breakfast item. So like little changes like that is what they are looking for.
Yeah, so we'll jump down to C then. So what they did do a survey back in October about the pickup and delivery. So, and I won't go through it all because, again, this is their forte, but I just want to let you know that they did do a survey and they're making adjustments based upon the feedback that they've gotten back. So as you can see on the survey, they do talk about, what they're offering, how often, is it meeting your needs, not meeting your needs? Do you prefer lunches to be bulk style or different items for each day? So they did do a survey to kind of help them along and saying how they need to modify. Because again, this was all kind of thrown immediately at us. We didn't really have a plan that we were planning for a while to get everybody's input. We just had to kind of go for it and then modify it as we go along. So I just want you to know they did do a survey, and these are the highlights of it. So what can we do better to meet your child's needs? So you can see that. But you can see majority of them were satisfied and thankful. So at least they're getting some feedback. But again, you never just sit still. You're always trying to improve it. And so that's the attitude that they're taking to kind of look at all this data.
I've had several parents come to me recently in the last few months and comment about the food. But I think a lot of that is because we set such a high bar before we went to grab and goes.
Right. You can't have a fresh salad bar every day. You give them a bag of lettuce, it doesn't last. It just doesn't.
Right.
Plus, you don't know what kind of house situation. Maybe they don't have a refrigerator to put it into, or it's too full for something else. So those kind of things you have to deal with. So that's why they have to be, flexible on how they do things. Yes.
Yep.
And you heard the volume, over 100,000 a week. It's a huge operation. The food service staff is really, and I visited a lot of the distribution sites when they were giving them out, and they stepped up. And I know, Trustee Berry, you recall that in March when they jumped at it, and we had volunteers from PTA and everyone came together. So
it's amazing because the need is so great right now.
Right. So just to go quickly up to B, that an offer was made on that property, and right now it's still sitting in limbo right now, no response. So just so you're aware of that. Down to D, bond discussion. So this is the last one I really kind of want to just touch base on. We are still working on the survey. It's being developed by Zogby, which I guess is a well-known firm that's used to doing surveys for millages and bond issues.
Can I mention that, Tom, that David was in his glory because the heads of Zogby were in one of our meetings. David was like just in his, you know what I mean? To him, it was like it's a superstar when he met with the Zogby. It was the dad and I think the son.
So interesting, because that's not something I've dealt with a lot before. So I learned a lot just listening to them. But we have an opportunity to refinance some of the 2014 bonds. With the current market and the interest rates, they have dropped tremendously, as you're probably well aware of, that some of our bonds, we have a callable option that we can actually reduce the interest rate that we're paying on the bonds. So we basically would have these bonds, would issue new bonds at a lower rate. The money that those bonds raise would go to pay off the old bonds. And we would keep the existing or the new bonds at the lower interest rate going forward. So when that happens, you realize the savings, not that we would actually get money, but we called, what's the right professional term, tax defer, or I don't know, whatever it is, you don't have to, you lower what we have to make payments in the future. So it's cost avoidance in the future or bond payments. So no one actually gets a refund per se, just the tax rates that we would charge later to pay these bonds would be lower.
If we're able to do that, does that allow us to expire bonds for early?
And so this is what this is looking for, an option 1 and option 2.
Okay.
So option 1 is saying, all right, we take the bonds that we can call back and at a lower interest rate. And I'll pull up one of the sheets, but if you're not familiar with financial documents, it gets very confusing.
And it's very small.
Yep. That's why I sent them out earlier. So if you wanted to, excuse me, blow it up earlier, you could have. But
Okay.
basically, what it's looking at, that we could call back at the very top here, if you can see my cursor, of roughly 57 million bonds now in May, and basically realize a savings. If you look down here at the bottom right-hand side, the very bottom, a $7.3 million savings in future bond payments by lowering the interest rates. And the present value of that is 5.2 million. Those are the two numbers on the bottom right-hand screen on the very bottom right. So
Can
that's
you
if we
repeat
just
that
did it
real
all
quick?
at once. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would you please repeat that real quick? We can
Oh.
call back 57 million in bonds.
Right,
And
that's the number up on top here.
right.
And if we do that by lower interest rates, if you look in the interest rates on a lot of those, in this middle column here is 5%, 4%, 5% mostly in the middle box. For the box to the left, you can see the new interest rates of 0.35, 1.25, 2, 2.15, and basically the lower interest rates that we pay on the new bonds versus the existing bonds, that's the money that you would avoid paying in the future.
Right.
Of the 7.3 million.
So Tom, if we wanted to go, decide on which option to go with, are we assuming that for option 2, we would have to kind of guess which way the market's going to go?
Right.
Moving
So
forward?
that's what we call interest risk. That if we say we're going to do some of them now and a portion later, that where there's interest risk involved, that the rates potentially could go back up. Now, they're not going to skyrocket up, but they potentially could go back up where you potentially would not have as great of a savings. There will always be savings, no doubt about it, because the interest rates are so low. But the question is, a year from now, when we do the second series, would the interest rates still be as low as they are now?
So everything becomes political, obviously. So now with the new administration, obviously it's obvious that they're going to be spending a lot of money. What do you think? Do you think that all that spending is going to spook the market and interest rates going to start creeping up?
What I've been hearing is the rates aren't going to go up for at least a year, if not a year and a half, 2 years. That is going
You're hearing that
to be low
from
for a while. Yes, that's what I hear from Raymond James, from PFM, all the marketing people that watch it much more closely than I can.
Sure.
They're basically saying 2023 is when you might start seeing a significant increase. Now you might see incremental, but a significant increase in 2023.
Oh, trust me, as a realtor, that's music to my ears right now. So
yeah.
It sounds like you're probably leaning towards option 2.
Right. So on option 2, let me get back to the agenda. And again, you're welcome to look at this stuff much more in detail later.
Just what I want to do.
Yep. That there would be 2 series. There'd be a first series and a second series. So the first series would be, the first series would be only 44 million, and the second series would be 12 million. So a little more, because a year from now, more bonds are callable for us to reimburse or to refund, and the savings will go up to a higher number.
How do you determine what's recallable?
That's how the bonds were, when bonds are issued, that they're issued with a callable date.
Okay.
And those are issued back when we did the original bonds back in 2014 to look at what we could maximize at the lower interest rate on those bonds. Because the shorter they're callable, the higher the interest rates. The longer they're callable, the lower the interest rates. So usually you want to call, if the rates have changed significantly in the marketplace, you want to call them back like we're doing now and issue a new bonds at a lower interest rate for us. So the creditor will obviously pay for a shorter callable date. You have to pay a more interest cost to them, and then vice versa.
What do we have outstanding? And you don't have to go through it now, but if you could send that information, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, I will do that. And so the other thing that comes into play also is the millage rate. That depending on how we want to handle the bond planning going forward, what interest rate, do we want to pay some of the bonds off earlier? Do we want to have them continue their normal rate? So those are the things we're all going into, whether we take option 1 or option 2. Because right now on the bond program, we know that, one, we're not really set to go yet. So really trying to get something to the state by June to have a November election is going to be very tough. We'd have to move awfully quick, and I don't think that's the position we want to take. So we're most likely not going to do any kind of bond program for this coming November, just because we'd have to rush. And I think, we really need to educate the public on what these bonds are for. So I think, rushing, trying to get something to the state in the next couple of months to call election for November is going to be very tough. In addition, the city election is in November. And that's going to be a whole other issue that's going to take away from what we're trying to do. So I don't know if we want to compete with that either. So all that is kind of being discussed right now by the committee that we have together to kind of look at our future bonding program. Now, whatever we do, I'm always looking down the line that this refunding has to be part of a bigger discussion with the public that's saying this is our first step in dealing with our bond program for our infrastructure. That this isn't by itself. This is all combined together because we're talking about these bonds are infrastructure. We're looking at refinancing, lower the rates so we can potentially do something more later with our bond infrastructure program. So as we talk about this, we have to make sure that the public knows this is just the first step in a multi-step plan to deal with our infrastructure. So that's how we have to make sure we release it to the public that we have a long-term plan, and this is the first step to kind of get us there.
Tom, did we confirm one way or the other if the city's going to be asking for taxes this year?
I know there's an opportunity for it, but we have not gotten any clarification yet.
Okay, and I guess the other thing that would come in play is we have to communicate with the college too. So
Correct.
We're not going out at the same time. So that should be
we
part of
also
the
know
planning.
in 2025 or 24, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, that we have our own 18 mil and non-homes are in our non-homestead millage and our, I forgot the word of it. Our 6.17 mils for our being
Hold harmless.
millage. Thank you.
I believe the hold harmless is in 2024.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying. So we have to be
Right.
careful of that because we don't want to confuse people with that with our infrastructure. So that's why we have to look at a long-term plan for our millage and our infrastructure program. And this is the first step.
Good stuff. Thank you.
All right. So, and that's the kind of the finance committee agenda. Normally we would have our next one in April as we kind of know where our assumptions are for our next fiscal year, 21-22, because we'll know what the governor plan is, the House and Senate plans, and we'll kind of be prepping everybody to know this is kind of the range we're at. We kind of do a rough look at our first look at our budget for next year and kind of go from there.
Great. Thank you very much. Great work.
Yep,
All right. Any
absolutely.
last questions?
I'm good. Just for record, I'm good.
I'm good.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Then
you
I'll
for all
turn it
of
back
this.
after you to Irene to kind of close out the meeting.
Okay, so our next meeting date looks like it's gonna be April 5th, 2021. Anything else?
Just note the time that we close.
Thank you. All right. So the Finance Committee, it is 5:38 on February 9th, 2021. Meeting adjourned?
Yes, thank
Yep.
you.
All right.
you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Take care.